Hello and welcome to another Overlord lore video, and today we are going to take a look at the army of the Sorcerer Kingdom. We will go over the army's composition, their numbers, their recruitment process, their special forces, and many other things related to it. But before we do so, let me thank my Patreons for supporting this channel. Also, since we have never been given a full description of them or a complete unit list, I had to fit everything together myself. So please take everything I say from now with a grain of salt. Also, in order to highlight the army of the Sorcerer Kingdom itself, first and foremost, I had to exclude anything and anyone from Nezarec that isn't primarily there to defend the Sorcerer Kingdom, but to defend the Great Tomb itself. Secondly, I added all forces loyal to the Sorcerer Kingdom. And thirdly, I throw in every possible force the Sorcerer Kingdom could itself mobilize without needing backup from the Great Tomb of Nezarec. And first and foremost, we will go over the Undead Troops, who not only form the backbone of the Sorcerer Kingdom's army, but also are perfect for armies themselves, since Undead don't need to sleep, they don't tire, they don't need provisions, they can't fall sick, they are immune to toxins, freezing temperatures, and they feel no fear or have second thoughts about orders. They will also not pillage a village unless explicitly instructed to do so, making them actually more humane soldiers than many medieval armies by comparison. But there are also quite a few disadvantages. At least the baseline of skeletons and zombies have sub-brick levels of intelligence and can adapt to a changing battlefield situation only when instructed by smarter undead commanders. Also, all undead share the weakness of fire and holy magic, making it quite easy to exploit, for example by setting fire to forests or towns. And thus it could be a great way to slow down their approach, deny them passage at least for a time, or just defeat an entire army of the undead, by allowing it to sack your capital city for example, only to then set it ablaze after a mock battle, because while you are fireproof, the Ainz zombies aren't. Yes, I'm still salty about Season 8. And with that said, let's begin with the very basic units, the skeletons. And they are quite weak by Sorcerer Kingdom standards, only barely able to stand up to a human, and their equipment is also mostly consistent of rags and rusted spears and spears, and most trained warriors can take on multiple of these enemies at the same time. However, they have one great strength to them. They can easily be created by the dozens, not just by Ainz Ooal or by Pandora's Actor, but also by nature, for example on the Cat's plane, and then they can just be enthralled via control on that. And supposedly many other characters in Nezarec are also able to create these baseline of undead. For example the Overlords in the Great Library. So again, quantity has a quality of its very own. And they also can play a vital role in counterinsurgents, because they are used as cheap and expendable labor in the mines and fields of the Sorcerer Kingdom and its allies, and therefore they are distributed throughout the countries, and therefore constitute a distributed occupation force that people actually pay to have on their land, since they help with the harvest. On the flip side, these troops are dispersed and all over the place, and therefore assembling them into a single cohesive army is difficult and time-consuming to say the least. Next in line we have the, let's say, intermediate undead, which have received very little love, which is very sad, especially because some of them, like the bone vultures, are actually airborne, and therefore the Sorcerer Kingdom has an undead and expendable air force. And next in line we arrive at the middle tier undead, and we will start with the exceedingly heavy infantry corps comprised of Death Knights. They are considered to be legendary undead by the other nations, and they are a challenge even for members of the Black Scriptures, and therefore the bane of anyone below them level-wise. And not only can't they be killed by one hit, but they are also incredibly sturdy with thick armor, a tower shield, and an incredible nasty ability. They can create squire zombies from the slain enemies, which, while limited in number, can themselves create normal zombies if they kill people. So an army of just a few thousand Death Knights would not only be able to destroy an entire nation, it would likely also be able to turn a significant portion of its citizens into undead assets. And in the grand scheme of things, these undead soldiers are working as anvils, while soul eaters, the undead ethereal horses, bathed in corpse light, are the hammer that fall on the enemy's flanks and rear, while the Death Knights themselves will chew through the infantry ranks. And aside from the fact that soul eaters are also able to kill anyone off weaker than them, they are also capable of ranged attacks. So basically they are horse archers without archers. And they can also be used to mount Death Knights, which are then able to draw fire onto themselves instead of the more fragile horse below them. And of course, some soldiers, high-ranking nobles and military officers might still survive this onslaught for an hour, by virtue of being behind the army instead of leading it from the front line. Which brings us to Death Assassins, which are, as you have guessed, powerful undead assassins able to assassinate important persons. And last but not least, we have Death Warriors. While they are less sturdy than Death Knights, they are great line breakers because of their high attack value and their ability to throw their swords and then simply make them reappear into their hands immediately after. But all of them have a significant disadvantage. Half of them are created by Pandora's Actor, meaning that they are all a bit weaker than Ainz Ooal's undead, but every time Pandora's Actor takes another form other than Ainz Ooal, they would stop moving. But still, even at half strength, this army is incredibly powerful. And last but not least, where does Ainz Ooal get all of the bodies to obtain the several 10,000 strong undead force and the many additional skeletons dispersed over the nations and its allies? Well, after volume 14, more than enough corpses became available, but in the meantime, Ainz used, for example, convicted murderers, in addition to the corpses on the graveyard of E-Rantel, to raise his armies of the undead. And since the graveyard is a small necropolis in its own right, and since it takes up a fourth of the outer ring of E-Rantel, it makes for a very convenient and close way to recruit undead soldiers. And before we take a look at the demi-humans themselves, we have to cover two more undead units. The first, and easily one of the most important ones, are the Elder Liches. While normal zombies are mindless idiots, barely able to keep up with Remedios' intellect, and Death Knights and Death Warriors are not exactly bright either, Elder Liches are highly intelligent and adaptable, thus making excellent officers that can direct the mindless zombie swarm and brainless skeleton soldiers so that both may form a coherent army and not just a pile of bones and rotting flesh easily taken advantage of. Or to come up with a Warhammer 40k comparison, they are essentially akin to the synapse creatures of the Tyranid hive mind, taking in the instructions of the leadership and passing it on to every single undead that would otherwise only be capable of disorganized, baser instinct-driven behaviors. And aside from that, they are also very capable magic casters, able to cast Fireball to mass-fry enemies, or lightning to pierce deep infantry formations, thus making them extremely valuable, powerful, and versatile. And the second undead unit would be the Frost Dragon Air Force, because after Ainz visited the Dwarven Kingdom, he had taken some souvenirs. Olasir Dark Halilial, a Frost Dragon of level 46, as well as one of his more dim-witted sons, that attacked Ainz after he killed his father in plain sight, within the blink of an eye. But there are a lot more Frost Dragons serving Ainz Ooal than just the two undead ones. And aside from being able to freeze their targets in seconds, thanks to the heavy breath weapon, and being capable of at least 3rd tier magic in the case of Olasir Dark Halilial, the strongest of them, they are also flying units. And they were used for connecting the Sorcerer Kingdom by essentially allowing fast travel between the demi-human exclave and the mainland territory. So in a sense they combine the function of Air Force and Airline, and they can also take on deadly ordnance. For example, during the War of Annihilation against the Kingdom of Riestais, they bombed the cities with soul eaters, essentially soul-sucking ponies that once landed were unmatched in power, provided that they survive the fall. And since dragons are extremely durable and strong, they are easily able to take air superiority from anyone daring to oppose Ainz Ooal. But not only frost dragons, but also frost giants were conquered by Ainz Ooal's forces once they had entered the Elysian Mountains and aided the beleaguered dwarves. And these creatures are equivalent in power and might to the frost dragons, so they should be at least able of reaching level 40, and as literal giants they are great line breakers and builders, as they were the ones polishing the statue of the Sorcerer Kingdom during Nea's entry into the capital city of E-Rantel. And since both the frost dragons and the frost giants share the immunity against ice and cold with the rest of the Undead Army, they are able to fit in quite well. Though, and this is important, any living creatures needs provision, shelter, sleep, and they could fall ill. So in my opinion it would be best to separate these forces into an undead and into a living army, so that the undead aren't slowed down by the living ones' need. But while both will march separate, they can still fight together. For example, an undead army could be used to lure out enemies in order for the living army to attack them from the side or rear, and the dead soldiers from the enemy's side would then be used to restock the undead army. And with that said, let's take a look at the demi-human armies of the Sorcerer Kingdom proper. And all of these forces I'm going to shed light on have been displayed during the invasion of the Holy Kingdom, during Ainz's Goblin Army arc, or during the conquest of the dwarves, the Quagoa and the Lizardmen. And let's start with the units of the Abelian Hills, and boy oh boy we have some great units there. For example, ballista-wielding ogres. Their sheer size and strength allowed them to use siege-level weaponry as crossbows, thus making them great for attacking castles or entire cities. And thanks to their superior range compared to normal crossbows or bow and arrow, they can attack the defenders without risking much in the way of a counterattack, since only their own siege weapons could be able to harm them. The demi-human army also has black rock shooters. No, not that one. Demi-humans who eat stones and are able to shoot their meal back at high speed. Essentially, they are able to inflict as much damage as a trebuchet while still being mobile enough to retreat and advance fast, making them way more versatile than their wooden counterpart. They are also demi-human goatmen, the so-called bear folk, that are not only capable fighters, but their fur has the nasty ability to dull any metal weapon it touches, thus making it difficult to fight them. And they also have the tendency to go berserk once cornered, which is a nice way to ensure that they would fight to the bitter end, something that living troops tend to avoid for some reason. Furthermore, the demi-human army of Ainz Ooal has the Zoroastrians, half horse, half tiger, weapon-wielding demi-human cavalry. You know, in case you're absolutely positive you need the enemy cavalry spooked to the extreme. And their leader was able to give Remedios a hard time in a fight, so they are far more capable than just normal horse-based cavalry. Especially because demi-humans tend to be bigger and stronger than normal humans, while they have very few truly overpowered or substandard units, and this greater uniformity makes them excellent material for a well-organized army. Additionally, we have the Megalos tribe of the Abelian Hills, gigantic four-armed snakes capable of using magic, and they are probably also great at grappling attacks, and their long bodies give them great reach, while their magic potential grants them greater versatility. And they are probably also able to scale mountains and city walls far more easily and far more quietly than, for example, the Zoroastrians. I mean, just sneak or rather snake in at night, kill the guardsmen at the city gates, open the gates, and let in their own troops. And while the Megalos are great at hugging, the Speedons, spider-like demi-humans, are able to use web as ropes, or a way to disable enemy troops, thus making the capture of important or semi-important units or leaders far easier. And aside from that, gigantic spiders are not exactly a welcome view on any battlefield as far as I would be concerned. Furthermore, the demi-human army has the Zern, eel-like demi-humans among them, and at least 3,000 of them defected to Ainz Ooal on site. And they are insect-like demi-humans, living in hive structures, but what makes them so special are their rations, for they feed on bodily fluids and liquefied bodies of animals, men and demi-humans alike, and thus are excellently suited for cleaning up after a fight, if no more undead troops are needed or the daily creation limit has been reached. For they eat every dead, including their own. Also, and this tends to be overlooked, 10% of the Quagoan tribes have actually survived their encounter with Shaltir, and thus would still excel at tunnel fighting, especially because they are essentially immune against metal weaponry. And while not from the Abelian Hills, the Sorcerer Kingdom also has subjugated troll tribes, who are great at regenerating from every wound, except from fire and acid ones, making them very durable fighters. And of course, no demi-human army video would be complete without mentioning the physical strong swamp fighting specialists, known as the Lizardmen, and after Cocytus conquered them, the Toadmans of the Great Lakes. And the Lizardmen themselves are armored, thanks to their natural scales, and they can be outfitted with additional armor. And as mentioned, they are excellent swamp fighters, while every other unit are quite literally bogged down. And they can also use, for example, slingshots, thanks to their greater physical strength, far more effectively compared to normal humans. Essentially, their physique allows them to fling heavier projectiles with greater velocity over longer distances. And last but not least, we have the Goblin Army, which is 5,000 goblins strong and fiercely loyal to Enri, who in turn is fiercely loyal to the Sorcerer King, like the rest of her village. And this army has not only the second strongest paladin in this world, yes, stronger than Remedios, but also wolf riders, fireball-flinging bombardment goblins, a great strategist, assassins, and of course the red-cat goblins who are as strong if not stronger than your average frost dragon. Essentially, this would be a fourth army to the Sorcerer Kingdom in times of need, while the Lizard and Toadman troops would be the third, and the demi-humans of the Abelian Hills will constitute the second one, while the Undead Troops of the Sorcerer Kingdom will act as the primary fighting force. After Ainz Ooal conquered the Riestais Kingdom, we are highly unlikely to see the armies of Riestais reborn, because of their usual warfare approach of just hurling peasant levies at the enemy until they eventually drown in their blood. And this isn't practical anymore because there aren't just that many Riestais peasants left alive to form an army from, and what actually is alive will likely be too busy with ensuring that they stay that way. Now, when I think about human troops in the service of the Sorcerer Kingdom, I always think about the Empire's legions, which as a subject state will happily help the Sorcerer Kingdom if they are asked to do so. And while in the past they had fielded 80,000 professional soldiers divided into 8 legions with 10,000 men each, things have changed quite a bit. First and foremost, ever since the Empire became a vassal state of the Sorcerer Kingdom, their military apparatus had been greatly reformed. Fully half of the legions were disbanded and replaced by undead troops, but what remains might likely be stronger and harder than the average Imperial Knight before, because now the only knights left in the Legion are combat-hardened veterans that have likely witnessed the massacre at the Cuts Plain, and are now still willing to fight alongside the undead. But even if this is not the case, the Imperial Knights of Baharut are still a sight to behold, fully armored, equipped with keen blades, ample supplies, and horses to ride on. They are truly fine soldiers by human standards, and are already used to work in independent legions with 10,000 knights each, making them excellent expeditionary forces. especially because these knights are backed up by magical support in the form of human casters, ranged units, and even an air force, including griffins and hippogriffs. Additionally, since they are a standing army ready to be deployed, and human on top of that, they might also be sent towards the Dragon Kingdom in the future in order to halt the Beastmen incursion, while not scaring the native population half to death twice, just by being compromised of undead troops or demi-humans themselves. Similarly to the Kingdom of Riestais, the Dwarven Kingdom, despite being saved and rescued by Ainz, is still too diminished to send a full army to help Ainz Ooal in his endeavors, though I'm sure a token force will be sent if requested. And while I really like the idea of a stout dwarfman fighting alongside undead and beastmen legions, for example as a dependable centaur, while beastmen chivalry rush down the enemy flanks, it is very sensible for the dwarves to replenish their numbers first, before heading out and fighting wars. And since in Overlord there are no red men in the sewers and on the underground, just like in the Empire, this strategy might actually work. Next in line we will find the Holy Kingdom's troops, and especially Nea's archer unit might be of interest here. While every man, woman and child is or will be trained to defend themselves and fight in an army, they are just citizen militia. While on the other hand, Nea's archer unit is made up of the finest and most dedicated zealots you will find outside of the theocracy. And with Nea acting as the head archer, they would also know how to aim for the heads, if you get my drift. And this elite unit would be able to render valuable ranged support against enemy units. Furthermore, Nea is also likely able to imbue her arrows with magic properties at this point, giving her class change after her revival. And so might be, in essence, all of the other archers as well, because remember, they have a strong tradition in the Paladin order, and as you can imagine this might become quite handy, especially because if Nea and her unit are deployed against the slain theocracy, with whom the Holy Kingdom always had a dispute of faith, especially in these times. But my point is here that angels get a damage reduction from all physical attacks, thus magic-imbued ranged attacks are a welcome addition to the Sorcerer Kingdom's armies. On top of all of this, Nea and many other former squires, or even fully trained paladins, were able to use moral boosting spells like Under Divine Flag, or could at least negate fear effects. And this is really important because living troops tend to value their life to a detrimental degree, fleeing from the battlefield despite being told to stand and hold the ground, for example. Therefore, some extra motivation is just the thing to keep the humans and demi-human elements of Ainz Ooal's army able to fight alongside the undead troops. And last but not least, Nea is fairly great at convincing others that Ainz Ooal is fairly great, something that might give something to believe in after Ainz Ooal's armies destroyed the theocracy thoroughly, or even made Zeshi and her sibling part of his kingdom. And speaking of this, the Sorcerer Kingdom is currently rebuilding and reforming the Adventurer Guild, turning it into an Explorer Guild in the process. So Ainz would likely have created an ample supply of scouts and human skirmisher units, perhaps some that are able to infiltrate the human nations without being discovered by, for example, having healing magic cast at them. I mean the very fact that they wouldn't be undead troops with illusion magic casted upon them, or doppelganger, but just loyal forces of the Sorcerer Kingdom would make their infiltration attempts so much more believable. And of course unexpected. And last but not least, while Ainz still doesn't have these humanoids recruited yet, he is currently heading towards the Elven Kingdom, and thus might be sooner rather than later able to add elven archers and magic casters to his army. And once again I remind you that he has already 3 elven girls working for Aura and Mare, who are seen by them as kings, due to their different colored eyes, which is always seen as a sign of nobility and divine birthright among elves. Hence why Zeshi, who through her father's lineage is also of noble descent, also has heterochromia in her eyes, which is an interesting connection that will undoubtedly have meaning once Aura and Mare enter the Elf Kingdom, especially because it was mentioned that these eyes are important, and maybe the Elf King will mistake the twins for his children, which would then lead to a rapid succession and takeover of whatever elven army elements the slain theocracy had left, before the war between the Elven Kingdom and the state of the six great gods will essentially turn into a proxy or even a full-fledged war with the Sorcerer Kingdom itself. And with that said, I say thank you very much for watching, and special thanks to Bad Guy Yi, Bad Burrito 316, Bezer, Ben C, Brandon D, Chrissy, Crowley 0221, Sia, Dead Slime, Death is Mercy, Deathless Dragonlord, Demon Xenomorph 1987, Devin Downen, Ding Dong, Duckwagon, Dystopia, Dystopia II, Enigmatic Unicorn, Feral Shivan, Guy with That Head, Hector Marino, Hoss, Huster, Jacob G, Janami, Jason, Chromius, Legendarius, Lelouch Britannia with a Mustache, Lexus Fox, Lord Nishikian Rai, Lord Touch Me, Merovec, Mr. Shoes, Mr. Tweaker, Michael R, Michael Y, Normal Toad, Oakhill, Overlord General Gasper, Paddy Pantom, Paz Sonich, Primus 11, Shergox's Daddy, Shadow Lightning Wolf, Shrine Keeper, Staris, Ted, Texas Deer, the Orc Warboss, Rocket Smasher, T.E. Wang, Vash Hawkeye, Vegito 27, Venture Fanatic, Wilhelm, and Zonegon. Anyway, have a nice day and I hope to see you all again soon under my next video.